And we are live with my good friend and brother, David McGuire from Indianapolis. He is a charter school principal, educator, lifelong dedicated person to informing the next generation and preparing them for great lives. David, thank you, brother. I appreciate you for joining me.
I appreciate the opportunity.
Listen, this is what I wanted to talk about. We have, on my morning broadcast, have had many conversations about different types of schools, the history of Black education, and most of it in search of what our strategy should be for the next generation. What do we do from here? One of the things that is controversial that always comes up is charter schools. And Chris, how can you support charter schools? And even as recent as yesterday, that conversation was going. And it always throws me off because when I think about charter schools, I think about people like you. You know this. I travel so much across the country, meet so many people, and the face of who's actually doing the work that I care about is not the face that the public usually sees when we talk about school choice, charter schools, and all of this stuff. So I feel like it's important to highlight it and elevate it and lift it up and say, I understand the fight that you all are having about the policy around education and charter schools and who gets to run schools, but that's not my fight. That's just not even my battle. This is my battle. Black educators who want to do for self, do for community, educate our own, who see getting this license, this ability to run a school or to collaborate with others to run a school or educate our kids. That to me is the strategy. That's the message for tomorrow. But for you, this is where I want to start. Read something that you wrote that said, my parents, I got to get it right. Your parents used someone else's address to get you into what they thought was a better school for you. And that made a big difference in your life to even get you to the point now, today, where you can educate others. So that's why I called this show Stealing an Education and then Paying It Forward. Tell me how you think, two things. How do you think that made a difference, or not think, how did that make a difference in your life that your parents were able to strategically get you out of a certain school or get you to a better school? And how does that inform the work that you're doing every day as a principal, as an educator with the next generation of kids?
Yeah, so there's three parts of that's still in the address to get me there. So the first was when I was in fifth grade. I was a typical, fifth grade boy, right? Rambunctious and everything. And so it's easy to get this label slapped on you. But I had a fifth grade teacher, God rest his soul, James Lloyd, that told my dad that there's nothing wrong with your son. He's just a typical boy, right? And I remember standing there listening to him tell my father that. And so that catapulted me into middle school where, I went off and did great things. So from there, I then went to high school where I met two educators who still to this day that I call mentors and friends, Roy Dobbs and Mari Swain. And so being able to have them as teachers, Roy Dobbs was the first Black male that I saw in the school, in the classroom, that I said, I could probably do this, right? He was a basketball coach. He was my social studies teacher. He started a boys group called Young Men of Purpose. So that fostered that. And then ultimately, when I first started teaching, my first job was at the place I graduated, which was Pike, right? With the same township. So not only did I have a teacher that believed in me early, I had two mentor teachers that I saw that this is something I could do, but also it was the place that gave me my first job. And it wasn't, I don't think any of that would have happened had my parents not used my grandmother's address and then my aunt's address, and then put me in the township. And so that is still to this day why I feel like I have an obligation thinking about where my school is, why I don't want any of my parents to have to, we're away from the times of using people's address, but still you do have parents that commute their children 15, 20 minutes away from their neighborhood to go to a school. And so I pride myself on making sure that I run a school in a neighborhood where parents can feel proud. And we can do the same thing for our children that, essentially Pike did for me.
We are still in the time where people are using other people's addresses in many cities. And in some cases, I've said it on this broadcast before, in some cases, they're being arrested for it.
Yeah.
Right. It's a crime. That's like when I use the word stealing in education, it's not just to be dramatic. Those people are literally charged with larceny, right? Larceny because of the cost of because of what it's assumed they're stealing from the school district. The cost is above whatever it is for larceny, like $2,000 or whatever, $2,000. They're literally like on the hook for larceny. And with some families, if you have the means and you get caught, you can just pay it.
No big deal.
Yeah, no big deal. You pay tuition to a public school. Tell me a little bit about the school, if you know that they were working around, your parents were working around when they were trying to get you into a different school.
So my mom always tells the story is that so the realtor and the house they thought it was one township, but the way, Indianapolis has these weird boundaries. So you could be in a neighborhood and like behind your neighborhood or behind your house could be another school district, right? So the neighborhood was split into 2 school districts. So my parents thought it was one school district, which was solid, but it turned out it was part of the Indianapolis public school system. So the school that I would have been, bused to, my parents remember driving through because, that I was their firstborn. So they're driving through trying to see the school. And my mom just says, she saw, crack houses and all types of stuff going on around the school. And she tells the story like she cried, literally. And the blog was titled, A Mother's Tears. She said she literally cried thinking about this is the school I'm going to send my child to, right? And so from there, like I said, she used grandma's address and eventually my aunt's address and drove me to the bus stop and my mail went there. And, so she didn't want that, right? And luckily I had other family members who were willing to, in that time, take the sacrifice with them because, Chris, not only can the parent get in trouble, but the person who allows the address can also get in trouble as well, right? So my grandmother and my aunt.
Stop on that point for a second too. Again, people think that this can sound really dramatic when we talk in this way. You literally can't. First of all, school districts are literally hiring private investigators to follow families home and to prove that they don't belong in that school. Sometimes those investigators are knocking on the doors of grandmothers and family members and demanding to come in without a warrant and acting as if they're police officers and they're not. That's a problem. They are saying things to families like, show me so-and-so's bedroom as proof that that person lives here, right? This is how medieval it gets. You can be arrested and what you just said that made me stop on this point. Kelly Williams Bowler, who is a friend and someone whose story gets told often, was one of the people that got arrested nationally. That became a national story that she got arrested. They went after her dad because she used his address and he knew very little about it. He was elderly. They put him in jail and he died in jail.
See?
Right. While and it wasn't like a long stint or something. He was just older and frail. And to get to her, they actually put him in jail and he died there. So she tells the story. She tears up every time she gets to that part of her story. But David, that's all around enrolling your child in a school.
That's it.
Just enrolling your child in a school.
Or wanting better, right? Like a choice as a parent, right? That just says, I don't want this for my child, right? I just don't. And for whatever reason, I mean, mine was, I can imagine I have a 1-year-old driving by a school and seeing a crack house and prostitutes, right? So like, imagine my parents, first time parents, young, early night, thinking about that, like all they wanted was a better school and a better opportunity, right? Just to put me in a position to do essentially what I'm doing now, right? And so my mother and my father never really understood it until I showed them the blog, right? Because they just thought this was the right thing to do, right? They probably knew about the risk, but they didn't understand the impact until I got to this point, right? So I became a principal and they understood my passion and my fight. And I told them, I said, the first time you told me that story, it became a cat, right? So like, how's that even possible, right? How does a zip code determine our future?
And it's very powerful. Zip code is very powerful in the lives of children, right? My grandmother used to tell me, show me your friends and I'll tell you who you are, which is one of the Negro proverbs. But you show me your zip code and I'll tell you a lot about how your life is going to go. It starts with the school that you're zoned into or not zoned into. This is Indianapolis though, right? So you are, you grew up in Indianapolis.
Yeah, born and raised.
Born and raised. How is Indianapolis different now? All these years later, that was your educational experience. What is it like now for kids in the same city.
So it's twofold. So you do have, in my case, you have a school that bought a vacant building in a neighborhood that had been neglected, right? So you have schools like mine, and Chris, like the charter school movement is huge in Indianapolis and is booming. And so charter schools are coming up, or innovation schools as they call it, where they take over previously low performing schools, and they're taking over schools in these neighborhoods to give kids better opportunity. But you still have parents who are willing to make the commute to another school in another area because they don't like it. Now, I haven't heard of stories in Indianapolis where they're necessarily checking addresses, but I wouldn't be surprised if it came out, because I do know it's probably in some affluent cities that they don't want the kids from my community on the Far East Side going up north to Carmel, right? They would definitely check on that, or there'll be something put in place. But I think because of the charter movement and because of the, I guess you could say, ed reform movement, there's a lot of schools that are coming in these neighborhoods to provide a better option to students and families so they don't have to make this choice. But we still have a long way to go. And Shantae and I talked about it on our show, because I don't know if necessarily the movement is really trying to help the Black community, the Black schools, or they just try to make a profit, right? So there's still that battle as well.
How is the community taken to the reform, the new schools, the charter schools? I mean, tell me more about that.
Yeah, it depends on the day of the week, right? So you get some communities who have their school taken over and they're excited, right? Because the school has predominantly been failing and they haven't been engaging with the community. But then you get the school that maybe was engaging and had been there, and grandma went there, aunt went there, and back then it was the best school ever, right? It was the champion school, and now it's not, and no one is really involved. But the moment the school tries to get taken over, everybody's up in arms. Everybody shows up, and I saw it on your show, everybody shows up to the board meeting with the signs, not wanting to close the school. But where were you at when the school was failing the kids for 10 years,
they
right?
Were nowhere to be found.
Nowhere to be found. So
no,
you get folks who, then it's like, we hate charters, you're stealing the money from public schools, and you get all this backlash. But it's like, where were you the 10 years prior when kids were year after year couldn't read, right? So we're fickle. I can say it because I'm born and raised, we're fickle. It depends on the day of the week, or depends on the moment in time when we want to be, I don't even know if I call it pro-school choice, but just when we want to be in an uproar about, education, it depends on the day of the week. But I think there are some pockets of places that are doing some great things. I would like to think that our school, great things, just because I guess the approach I'm trying to take, and the approach our network's trying to take. But I mean, Chris, you've been in cities, right? And you know how folks can get.
Yeah, no, it's like, you go to shut a school down, and it could be the most under-enrolled, underutilized school, built for like 1,600 kids and only have 300 kids in it, and the community can completely abandon it. And then you go to shut it down, and a whole bunch of people show up with the letter jackets. I went to this school in the 70s,
the yearbook,
90s, yeah, and this is the best school ever. And how dare you take away this wonderful institution? Mm-hmm. Now, my child doesn't go here, but it's such a great community, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
If y'all had shown up before, we wouldn't even be talking about
would be in this situation, right? If you would have volunteered at the school, or or I love it when the folks with the money who went to that school now want to show up. Like, where were you when the school didn't have any books and laptops and stuff like that? So
actually, I have a story up here from the Hechinger report. Private eyes track down kids illegally enrolled in suburban schools. This is a national thing. I want people to stop pretending like we don't know how the system works and how it's like rigged and designed to constantly keep us redlined into education deserts. Get back in your place. Your parents strove to do something, but they had to do it in a kind of clandestine way. People still have to do that. And as they're doing it, the system has a way to fight back. Look at this paragraph right here. There are 63 school districts in the 4 collar counties surrounding Philadelphia, and nearly all of them spend time and money making sure students from outside the district don't try to sneak in. Enforcement is necessary. Basically, they hire people full-time. They use public money to full-time hire private investigators to make sure that you're not stealing an education. But wait a second, David. I thought public education was the public good.
Exactly. So my question is,
equal to all.
Right. So if you're spending money on, I guess, I call them not even school police, right? The neighborhood police, right? The enrollment police. Does your school have a counselor, a behavior specialist, adequate teachers, up-to-date technology, up-to-date curriculum, state-of-the-art facilities, like quality food? If you have all of those things, and you then I could say, I mean, it's still wrong, but at least you money. But if you're compromising the money for those things I listed to pay for the enrollment police, we got a problem, right? Like, we got a problem.
Was deep on that point. That's so true. But David, or maybe not, and I will say this: if you have all those things, there's probably a higher chance that you're going to hire somebody to make sure that you keep the other kids out. It's the suburban school districts with really well-resourced schools that have all those things, the counselor, and the big ass gyms and the football fields and the water fountains at work. All that, like
filter.
That filter, the water without lead in it, all the quality stuff that goes into a school. Chances are you're probably more likely to hire private investigators to make sure that Negroes don't jump over the suburban fence into your good schools. But we don't talk about it. We talk about public schools as being a public good, open.
And you know why? Because what they're afraid of is, what if I have to actually do some teaching to this black child and actually have to educate them and get them on grade level, right? I don't want to do that, right? I need kids coming ready-made. Some of these schools need ready-made children, right? That I don't really have to teach. I don't really have to educate. I just have to show up, right? Yeah. So they don't want the little Negro kid jumping over the fence because, now I got to do some teaching, right? Now I got to actually know the curriculum. I got to actually know the parent and care about these things. And so you're right. I mean, it's their bottom line, which is our scores will stay good because we have ready-made children. And so I guess my fire is, okay, that's fine, but let me educate my K through 5th grader so that they do come to your school and then they will be just as much on par, right? So then now what's your excuse of keeping them out? Now your excuse to keep them out is because they're black, right? Because I'm telling you they're ready-made and they're academically ready, but now you're just trying to keep them out because they're black, right? But I think it's mostly because they want to keep their scores up, right? I want to keep a certain grade level or, test score, and I don't want to have to do the work to get there.
That's that feeds right into a question I always have about the belief gap. In your situation, your parents believed that if they put you in a better environment, you would do better, which to me says the opposite also. If they don't put you in a good environment, you would do worse. But you're the same kid. 2 different environments, same kid, right? I think we talk about children oftentimes in what I call the educational essentialism way, which is if you're poor or if you're working class or if you're from a certain part of town, you can just expect you're not going to do well. It has nothing to do with where we put you. It's just you, right?
Yeah.
How much do you believe that if you hadn't went to that better school, if you had went to a school that was considered not as good, that it would have changed where you are today, would have changed your life, made a difference in a real way?
So I wrestle with this, and I think recently I tell myself it wouldn't change because I tell my parents, you got to give yourself more credit than you giving yourself, right? So to your point, they put me in a better school because as first-time parents, they didn't really know, right? My parents didn't go to college, right? So they did get a degree, and people who did they worked and built their way up in their company or whatever. But what they didn't understand is that I would have been fine in whatever school because I would have came home to a loving home with 2 parents who would have sat down with me and helped me with my homework or would have got me tutor if I needed, who my dad put me in sports and did all these things. But in their mind, they said, like, we're not educators. We don't know much about school. This is our first child, right? We want to make sure that we put them in a school that can be successful. So I knowing my parents and watching how they raised myself and my brother and my sister, I don't know if it would have changed. I don't know if I would have had this same fire, right? Because I wouldn't have had this necessarily this why, but I think I still would have been successful because my parents put us in a great home that was loving, and they did things to make sure they fostered the right side of us. And so I tell black parents too, just give yourself more credit too, right? Like I do appreciate that you want to put them in a better school, but don't sell yourself short that you can also do just as well in absence of the school sometimes, right?
I love this point because it says that there's responsibility to go around. You do have to have a good school and with great teachers and principals who know how to lead great teachers and books and curriculum. Like there's a lot that goes into a school There's also a lot that goes into a home. When people try to make this an either or discussion, either you're going to have good parents or we're not going to educate you, or either, we're going to, have great schools or not, and you're not going to get educated. That's not a good formula. That never really works. It is a partnership. We got people, as always, making comments this morning. So you're our both good friend, Educator Barnes, Shantae Barnes from Indianapolis, where you're from, said something that was similar to what I was saying. The same people who show up to meetings when the school is shutting down are nowhere to be found when the school is looking for mentors and resources. Right. And this is one of the things we don't talk often about, was like, oh, you should fully fund our schools. You should give us this. You should give us that. Blah, 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 blah. I know principals and outreach directors and outreach coordinators and school district personnel and deans and whatever who are trying desperately to get some of the biggest mouthpieces who like to talk a good game into the damn schools to mentor kids. And they can't find 5 people. Right. In a community that if you were to try to close the school, now all of a sudden everybody would be an education expert. But so Shantae, thank you for that point. And for people who don't know, Shantae Barnes is an educator. Her and David are part of a clique of folks that write in Indianapolis, like a gang, but not a gang. They're like an intellectual gang.
Absolutely.
That write about education with Andrew Pillow, who's also an educator. The 3 of them are all 3 educators. Lamont Douglas says he thinks that there are situations where people and parents, community stakeholders are involved, but they simply need to be more educated about the process. And I think that that's really important, because activists a lot of times just try and rile people up and get them in the room. But in between meetings and in between incidents, they don't keep them on an ongoing path, becoming more and more educated about how schools work, how governance work, how these things work. Kiana Warren says suburban schools in the Indianapolis area are unsafe for Black kids. And I would love to know more about it. I mean, maybe you know something about that.
Yeah, listen, Chris. Here's the thing. People that from Indianapolis know that I love Indianapolis and I love the school systems, but Kiana's absolutely right, because there's some stuff going on in some of these schools that you read about or you see in movies, literally, right? And so, and honestly, I can say this, and Kiana, she's a school principal, she can agree, right? She's a charter school principal. Like, the reason why we are around is because these schools have blatantly failed, not just failed, but blatantly failed, meaning like it's almost like you intentionally have failed. Like there's things that have happened that you've either turned a blind eye to or unequipped to handle, and you don't seek the help and support. And so, I mean, you have some schools that is literally the have and the have-nots. And I'm in IPS, right? I'm in Indianapolis Public Schools. You have the have and the have-nots with schools. And it's terrible. And I have friends that teach in these schools that give me some of this stuff, where how does school A get technology? And they're the same K-6 building, but school B on this side of town doesn't get technology. Like, how do you decipher who gets it? Well, this school just happens to be in a more affluent area or whatever, and this school doesn't. And so, well, these kids probably are going to use it, or these schools are probably not going to take care of it. So let's give it to these kids, right? And so, for that going on now, they're doing a lot better job. But I mean, where was this, 5-6 years ago, and later on? So we are around like most charter schools because of the blatant absence of educating the children within that community. And again, I say blatant because schooling is hard. Being a principal is hard. Turning around a school is hard. It takes time. But people can tell the difference between a person that's trying to turn around a school and people that are just going through the motions, right? Yeah. And that's what we have a lot of, going through the motions.
Who in the community do you think is most responsible for highlighting, fixing, changing, inspiring people around the thing that you just said? For instance, like we have building A, they get one set of resources. We have building B, they get a different set of resources in the same district. We all know what's behind that, right? Like, power, privilege, influence. If you have a school that has power parents in it, they get one set of things. And if you have a school that doesn't have all the power parents in it, they get a different set of things. Who is it that you think is most responsible for calling that out? Do parents have to be the ones who organize to call that out? Do nonprofits do it? Does the clergy? Do we just wait for everybody to do it? Is it the Urban League? Is it the NAACP? Who are we waiting for to call school districts out?
So in my opinion, and I said this on the show, is those of us in education that have the privilege. And so table, we were talking about unapologetically Black. We got on the term of Black women in education, where I guess I experienced how maybe white men walk around society, because as an educated, well-groomed Black male, I have some privilege in education because, I'm considered an anomaly, right? And so because I now have this platform, I have an obligation to, one, speak up, and then I have a second obligation to rally and educate, to your point, the parents, the teachers, the other community leaders around this topic, and bring the group together, because I do have the knowledge and the understanding of what's happening and how to organize it. And so you have people like myself and others who have this sense of privilege in education, that we have an obligation, whether it's our school or not, to speak up, because I get kids all the time that come from other schools, and other schools get my kids. And so we are essentially in this together, but people don't see it that we're in it together. They see it as my school and your school. And it's like, no, because our families and our kids are transient, right? So we have an obligation to speak up. And so I've now, with my own platform, have tried to highlight some of these things and to try to talk to educators and galvanize folks, because I have a sense of privilege that I need to act on now, right? As a Black male, in absent of society, because we see what's going on with that. But in education, I have a platform now that I need to use, and I'm obligated to use if I say I care about the well-being of Black children and Black communities.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you were educated yourself. Your family set you up in life. You were able to do the thing that, let's be honest, if you went to college, if you're Black, raise your hand if you went to college. If you're Black and you came out the other end with a degree, raise your hand. If you are Black, came out the other end with a degree and got a job, raise your hand. If you are Black, came out with a degree, got a job, and went back to get another degree, raise your hand. With each of these things I just said, the number of Black people gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. Yeah. Like we don't ever count it up. We don't ever talk about real numbers. The number of Black people that actually leave high school and go to high school or go to college, enroll in college, is pretty big. The group that don't drop out in their first year with debt is a even smaller group. And, just keep going down. The ones who come out to where you are in life, master's degree, you got lots of fancy book learning, bro. I looked you up on LinkedIn. I knew you had some fancy book learning. I just know you were trying to get all of it. I didn't know you were trying to like, damn, give me all them degrees, right?
All of them, yeah.
But so it worked out in life. You could have went on to do a lot of things. You could have went to work for GE or or Accenture or Bain or McKinsey, something like that. And here you are, dedicating your life and your education to educating other people. It's an act of resistance that I think more people need to think about it the way you did when you just said, I have this platform, I have an opportunity to serve, and I'm going to use it for my people. I wish we saw more of that in educators, but I see more of the haterade. When you and I are having this kind of conversation right now, honestly, I can guarantee you I'm collecting hate. I'm
getting some too, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What
in my own city.
It? Yeah, in your own city.
In my own listen, so I don't know. I mean, I think it goes to the point of, and Chris, this, in a student of the history of Black history, when I said unapologetically Black, with unapologetically Black, it becomes unapologetically being truthful, right? And those people that are really that truthful, right, they don't last long. And I said it, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, right? They pushed the boys out of the U.S., right? So in education, what happens is you may not lose your life, but you lose your career if you speak on it too much, right? And so, but like I said earlier, I got this little bit of privilege. I don't know how long I'm gonna have it, so I'm gonna use it and use this platform as much as I can, because if I get enough people, you can't quiet us all, right? You can't shut us all down. You can't make us all be quiet. You can't tune us all out. And so, but the hate.
They can try.
Oh, and they will, and they will. But the hate in the city, and it's hate on both sides. The white people hate on you, the Black people hate on you, which I don't get why other Black people hate on you. I mean, I do get it, but I don't understand it.
Listen, I mean, come on, let's be real about this. We're always going to cut to the chase on some of these things. That group of people that I just said, if you made it through high school and got into college, and if you made it through and got a degree, and if you made it through and got a second degree, many of those people are going to end up with jobs with the government. And the place where they're going to end up with jobs in the government, mostly, they're going to congregate in public school districts. And they're going to make entire careers working for the government in government schools throughout their entire career, and they're going to get pensions, and those pensions are going to be their safety net in life and whatnot. So here you come along talking about we need to educate some children outside of this mess that you're in. Now you all of a sudden have a middle class, college educated group of people with pensions who are literally vested in the current system staying exactly the way that it is. It's obvious why you're a threat. It's obvious if you're saying, oh, no, I'm going to take about 300 kids out of this mess that you're calling an education, put them in somewhere else. I'm going to try and educate them over here. Of course you're the enemy then, right? So how do you feel to be the enemy? Because you're the enemy. You know, you mentioned Du Bois. Du Bois says, how does it feel to be a problem?
Yeah.
You know, you're a problem. You're really a problem because you're trying to take kids out of something that people have a vested interest in keeping them in.
You know what? Now I kind of like it, right? Because I like it now because, you know, you're right. I'm going to take my little 300 black and brown babies and we're going to educate them as best we can. And we're going to send them off to the next school that's going to educate them. And either A, you know, and I guess, you know, we're a college or die school. So I'm going to prepare them for college. Now, whether they go, it'll be their choice, right? And nobody else's. And that's the part people don't like either, right? Like, I'm going to make sure my students are prepared for college. And if they go, you won't be able to say they can't go. Your admissions requirements won't be able to say they can't go. They're either going to choose to go or not go. And I'm going to put them out in this world. And then they're going to continue the mantle of their, you know, at that point, a grizzly old, you know, principal on them to take over the world, right? And it's going to be a domino effect because essentially that's what generational wealth is, right? So what I'm giving is generational education. So I'm going to educate my kids to educate the next kids to educate the next kids. Well, you won't be able to stop it. There's nothing that you can do. And so I'm good with being the problem now because I've embraced my platform. I'm comfortable with who I am. I'm confident in that I'm doing what's right, and I'm ultimately doing God's work. And so at the end of the day, right, when I have to meet my maker and I have to answer to the, you know, to my sins or whatnot, I can honestly say, you know what, Lord, I did the best I could to do right by our people. And for that, ultimately, I'll rest well, you know, and there'll be somebody who will appreciate something that I do. Just like I said, James Lloyd, God rest his soul, an older white man in 5th grade, told my black father to the black, there's nothing wrong with your son. He'll be just fine. He'll be a boy, right? Let's fast forward now, you know, 20 some odd years later, here I am now, a principal of a school, right? Where probably some of the same people in that building would have never expected that. But he did. He saw some manifestation of that. And all he did was speak it. And then he passed away literally the next year when I was in 6th grade. But to this day, he's the reason I became a teacher. He's the reason why I look at white men the way I look at white men because of him, right? And so that's what's important.
I think it's really important that somebody's going to look at you that way now too.
That's what I hope.
You know, it's kind of a flaky thing that we say. It's not flaky, really. People act like it's a fuzzy thing to say, you know, each one, reach one, you know, and, you know, whatever. But you saw somebody saw something in you. There's nothing wrong with you. Which is just by the way, David, is like an incredibly powerful message to give to a person who is absorbing a million messages a day that tell them the opposite. You're not good looking. You're not part of the first class of people. You're not smart. You're not brave. You're not courageous. You're not the hero. You're not imaginative. You're not funny. You're not all the characteristics of Superman that are given to one group of kids. Their identity is tied up in I'm good. I'm number one. I'm the norm. My people's face are all over the money and all over the buildings. And if you go down that long line of presidents, you get to only one picture. Right. You get to only one picture where there's a brown person, and that brown person is quickly followed up by the whitest white person in the history of white people. Right. So the messages that you're getting is different than the person who tells you there's nothing wrong with you. You're going to succeed. Now you're that person. I love this story. I love how that works. Yeah.
And I think I have to tell my students every day something like that. Right. And it may not click this year or next year, but hopefully, like me, when I'm sitting in a college classroom in an HBCU and everybody around me is saying they want to be a lawyer and a doctor and a business person, I had the confidence to stand up and say, I want to be a teacher, right? As an 18-year-old freshman, and everybody looking like, you want to be a what, right? Even though we're sitting in the classroom with a black professor, right? So like, and I want to be a teacher. And I was confident enough at 17 to make that declaration, right? And be okay with it. Where you're right, I could have taken my MBA and all these other, did something else, but I feel like this is what I'm supposed to be doing, right? And I'm supposed to do it as best I can, as authentically as I can, and honestly as real as I can, right? And that's where I'm at now, right? I'm part of the realist generation, right, of education. So that's what we're gonna label our stuff. Yep.
Yeah,
the
realist movement, education realist. Okay,
yeah, education
I
realist.
like it. Yeah. We don't need a reform movement, because reform means that there's something that can be fixed. It can't be fixed. The nonsense is broken. The system is broken. So we need an education realist movement. I love it. Yep. All right. Well, you at the front end, so you just coined it. So you better put a trademark on it today, because it's yours.
Right.
So listen, we got
hashtag it.
Two brothers here have made comments that I think are worthy of wrangling with a little bit. So Vashawn Smith says, why is choice to leave the schools in the community and not put pressure on the community school to do better? I think by the question he is asking, we talk about choice, and choice always means I'm going to leave. I'm going to go out. I'm going to leave this bad stuff. But why don't we stay and fix it and make it better is the question I always hear. Instead of creating new schools, why don't you make the existing schools better? Instead of like fighting for choice, why don't you fight for equity? Like to make these schools get all the funding that they need, all the best teachers that they need. Even teachers who might even put their own kids in those same schools. Why not fight for that? Why don't we fight for middle-class Black people to come back and put their kids in the schools that they say they support so much? Why don't we get politicians to put their kids in the same schools? Why don't we just all come together, right? Which to me sounds like an interesting question, because it's kind of like, why are we only telling poor Black people that, right? The people who are in the schools that everybody else abandoned, including Black middle-class educated people who abandoned them damn schools.
Yeah.
Why is it only the people who are left behind that we're saying, why would you want a choice? Why don't you just stick around, make it better, right? Makes no sense. But I'm adding that to Mott. I think it's Mott Mize, or Mott Miss, who is a Mott Mize, I think it is, who is a coach in Newark, New Jersey, I think it is, who says, what about the people who live in those communities that are not served by those teachers and administrators who are also against an apartheid lottery system pushed by charters? So he is describing a person who agrees with us on the system and the traditional schools, and also has a critique of the charter schools that are replacing them and coming in. So having a critique in both directions. Now, this last line to me, an apartheid lottery system pushed by charters.
Ooh.
Like, I honestly don't know what that means in some ways, because it's like, if you have too many families trying to get into a school, the fairest way to let them in after you have too many is to hold a lottery, right? Instead of doing what district schools do, which is say, hey, if you have the wrong address, you don't get in. This is a school for rich white people. You don't get in here. Or this is a school for middle-class Black people who bought condominiums in this neighborhood so they can be so that they don't have to mix their kids with lower-class Black people, right?
Yeah.
So there are this many charter schools in comparison to this many like regular district schools, but people got so much heat for this small number of schools, including the ones like yours. How do you fend off the criticism that you're participating in something that somehow is against the community by being part of a charter school?
Yeah, I used to be real quick at the mouth and I want to say something and get into this debate and then lose sight. And then I start arguing about something that's nothing to do with the topic, right? We start arguing about something else, right? And so now I try to tune it out. I listen to it. You can't ignore it, right? So, but I tune it out. I don't engage in too much of the debate, but I do try to engage in it to educate. But the moment I see that my education of the topic gets lost, I just like, you know what, this is going nowhere, right? But because what is impressionable is my family's become impressionable of the language, because they don't understand how to decipher through it, or they don't understand how to block it out. So then they start to question maybe what the work that we're trying to do. And that's the part that I don't like, right? Because you're spewing this venom to people who don't understand yet how to decipher through it. And now you're making them question a decision for their child. And now that makes them question whether they're making the right choice, and they're unsure about the education they put their child in. And that's oftentimes why you get parents that move their kids around, because they hear something about a school that may not necessarily be true, but it's all they see and all they hear, and they can't decipher between it. And so now, they said this school does this and this, so let me take my kid out, right? So it's hard, because as a school leader, right, like I'm saying this, and X people with this title and this name are saying this. And it's like, your unions or whatever, or these people with these acronyms are saying this. And it's like, well, this guy's saying this school is not that, but I have so many people on this other side that are saying this. So I try to ignore, but I also try to educate. We have to educate. I think that's the ultimate, right? That's one of the things that I appreciate about the work that you all do. You and the A Black kids, like, we also have to educate, right? So I'm going to engage in a little bit, but I'm going to engage with you because I'm a fact check you, right? The same way Twitter did Trump, right? I got to fact check you. And so if you stop listening, then I just tune it out. I just stop it, right? Because it's going nowhere and you're taking me away from the work.
Joanne Price has a comment here where she says, you listen, you can't ignore, you engage to educate, then you move on. And I think that's good advice because a lot of us at, holidays with our own family will hear things, if you taught for TFA, you the devil, and if you, Lord had mercy, don't have been a TFAer or a charter school for some family members who have an awful lot to say, many of whom are putting their own kids into safe harbor of good schools and then talking a good game about how much they support, public schools and whatnot. I don't think we're ever going to get past this group of people in the community who have a critique for everything except for the system that they're trying to lift up and keep our kids in, right? And they'll tell you, well, I am critiquing those schools. No, they're not. You're reserving almost all your energy for this new group of schools because there has been a way to Afrocentricize the resistance to Black schools, to new people starting new schools. Listen, you can hardly find a state in the United States of America where Black fourth grade reading rises above 25% proficiency, right? And that's in a good state. Maybe a state or two, it's 30, right? But in almost every state, it's 2/3 of the kids are not reading proficient in fourth grade, and then it gets worse from there in many cases, like down to in 8th grade and beyond. This is with a $700 billion enterprise that is educating our kids every day. 8 million Black children, $700 and plus billion into a system, and less than 2/3, less than a third of Black children in most states. And in some cases, it's like 16% proficiency, 17% proficiency or whatnot. If you have your biggest critique for the people who are coming to say, no, we can beat that, we can change that, we can make that better. If your critique is for the EMTs of education who show up on the scene to help you with some emergency situation, an emergency management person, whatnot, you're going to beat up on the ambulance driver who's coming to rescue kids out of your dirty ass system. Then I don't have a lot of faith that you're one of the people that should be talking about our people. You shouldn't be talking about education or our people or any of that.
No, because how can you be somebody who's saying, I'm going to take my opportunity to go in this neighborhood and either A, come in and try to turn it around, or take the children out, educate them, and move them back in. So one of the things that we pride ourselves on is that I don't teach my kids to leave their community. I teach my kids to better their community. So if it takes leaving and coming back, I always tell them, come back and build the house in the community. Come back and put your time and your treasure and your talent into the community. But it may take you, once you get this education, stepping out for a while and, go to that bougie Ivy League school, or they go to that HBCU, or go wherever and get that education. But make sure that some essence of you come back, whether you buy a house there, whether you put your business there, or whether you put your time and your treasure there, right? Back in that community. And so how you fought people that want to do that? Like, how can you fix your lips to badmouth or critique people or entities that are trying to do that work? And to your point, like, if you are, you got no business fixing your lips to say anything about our community, our work, and our people. But they do. And so it takes us, it takes us part of the realist movement, right? to say something and to do something about it.
And I like this idea about saying it and moving on, because you can't fix ignorant. Like, you can educate people to the extent that they want to be educated, but if they are bound and determined to be ignorant and defensive of the system. The part I really hate is the Afrocentricizing of our need to stay with the regular system. You destroyed our schools. When were those our schools ever? Right?
When? Yeah.
Like, when were those? Which schools are you talking about that are? Show me the schools here that were built by Negroes and for Negroes and has a pedagogy for Negroes, and didn't fire all of its black teachers after Brown versus Board, and didn't like get rid of the African studies and all the things that would be, show me those schools, and then I'll be like, okay, yeah, like word those. If you are talking about closing those schools, then yeah, I'm with you. But if you're talking about these pension farms where middle class people of all races come to like get there to harvest the kids for their cotton, which is the per pupil income.
Yep.
That's not our schools.
No.
You protecting the wrong group of people. You protecting people with a vested interest in keeping them safe. Listen, I want to share this one thing with you too, and I want to get on to asking you about what you have learned about the brass tacks of teaching and learning, the pedagogical interventions. Like we talk about sociological things like, integration or busing or those things, but that's not teaching. That's not like when you're hiring for teachers, you're trying to run a classroom, you're trying to run a school. You're not trying to run a school by integrating kids. That's not what you do. So I'd love to know like what you have seen that you think needs attention in terms of classrooms and schools, as a principal. Right. But before we get there, I just want to add this one point here, because I think it's important to show this. So this is a study that was done by a conservative group a long time ago. So I'm going to just put that right out there as a conservative group. Don't anybody come after me like later, because listen, I'm not a progressive, and I'm definitely not like one of these folks. But listen, information is information. It's the Malcolm X thing. Like, I'm for truth no matter who says it. I'm for justice no matter who's against it. What this is basically doing, this was a study that showed the percentage of teachers, public school teachers, who send their kids to private schools, the percentage. And in city after city after city after city, teachers send their kids to private school at a much higher rate than the general public. In some cases, it's 40, 44%, 39%, 38% in school districts that have teachers unions and teachers who will throw on a red T-shirt in a heartbeat talking about our schools. Got to save our schools, the public schools. Right. You damn fool. If you out there marching with people who are sending their own kids to private schools at 3 times the rate of the general public. If the people who work in a restaurant tell you don't eat here, what is your problem with like saying this might not be for us? This might not be for us. Anyways, I'm just going to put that point out there for other people to see. Teachers are telling you to stay in these schools. They're also with their actions telling you that these schools are not their favorite in a lot of cases. So I just want to put that out there. So let's get to the brass tacks, the final things. It's good to talk about the journey that you had into education. It's good to talk about justice and equity and funding and billionaires versus teachers unions and all that stuff. Great conversation. What I care about is what happens every day in a classroom between a teacher and a child that either results in the child learning or not. It's a very simple equation for me. I'm a very simple man. I want to know, after 12 years of dropping this kid off with you in your classroom, can they read? Can they write? And are they prepared when they graduate to do something other than sit idle outside of the economic mainstream? That's what I care about. So what have you seen in your time in schools, classrooms, working with teachers, supporting teachers that you think that needs more attention, that we need to be paying more attention to?
Yeah, so I'm gonna start with the part that's gonna which is most people outside of education understand, which is the importance of relationships, right? The teachers that foster important relationships. And I won't stay too long on this, but there has to be this authentic relationship built between the teacher that teaches the classroom and the students within the classroom, right? That's important. That, Rita Pearson said in the TED Talk, like, the students need to know that they have a champion within their teacher, somebody who believes that they can be successful, right? That's important. Now, the piece that folks may not understand too much and not as sexy is the actual instruction, right? And so I love the talk you did with Doug Lamov and the two talked about writing, because now in this state, we have to talk about teachers and principals that understand how to truly educate children, right? And I talked about it earlier, right? Like, how do you prepare children to be educated, right? So you need to understand the state standards, right? However you feel about standards and Common Core, right? There's a skill within that standard that students need to know in order to be functioning, right? Like, you need to know, whether you went to college or not, you understand how to read an article and take out the essence or the theme of it, right? and to comprehend it and to share it with masses. You have to understand how to write articulately so people can understand and you can get your point across and you're not just rambling, right? That you can write concisely that people understand. You need to be able to understand math since that you can understand how to do your budget, right? So I hate people say, all you need to know to do is add and subtract. You need to be able to understand how to calculate your money, right? How to percentage of your paycheck needs to go to your savings, right? That's not a third grade skill. That is something later on in life that the kids need to know, right? And so they just need to know how to add and subtract. No, they need to understand how to percentage in a decimal work, right? They need to know those things, right? So,
and what they really need to know, just to be honest, don't get me started, but what they really need to know, I'm just gonna add a piece. They need to know how to multiply.
Yes.
Right. Because like adding and subtracting is good. That's cool. But what you need to learn is how to multiply. That's like a great skill. There's a whole bunch of people in our community that are good at division. Right. It's like it's their favorite thing. They love division. Whatever part of division, whatever day that division was taught, they were like front and center, like, woo, let me raise my hand. On the day that it became about multiplying and adding, they were nowhere to be found. Anyways, I'm sorry. Keep going, brother.
No, So and then right after that, after you get some of those pieces, right, then you have to make sure that you give your students skills that are transferable, right? So I don't want my students to just be good at Tindley Summit. I don't want you to just be a Tindley Summit student, right? I have to make sure that my student can function in different school settings because we only go up to 6th grade, right? So they have to go to a middle school. They eventually have to go to a high school and hopefully a college, and they have to be functional. And then they have to be in the society. So what we also do is we get so caught up in the instruction and helping the kids be educated that we don't teach them how to be people, how to operate in a world, right? And so you have to also balance that. So I said it, schooling is hard. Teaching and educating and principling is hard if you do it right, because it's not just about building relationships. It's not just about instruction. It's not just about helping kids function in society. It's about all three of those things, and you have to do them simultaneously every single day. So every single day I have to build relationships. Every single day I have to teach them and educate them instructionally. Every single day I have to make them be able to function in society. And then last and most importantly, every single day for my kids, my Black and brown kids, I have to make sure that they love themselves, right? So I have to do all four of those things every single day, 180 days out the school year, whatever, 210 for 18, 20 plus years.
Is it realistic that someone can do that every day? Those four things to me sound perfect. It sounds like an instructional sandwich. It sounds like an education sandwich. Put it all together, it works. Sounds like a lot to do for one person every day and to do it well.
But you know what is possible, Chris? The effort, trying to do those things, right? You may not accomplish all 4 or 5 of those things every single day, but you should be damn well trying to, right? And how dare you not at least try, right? And if you only doing 2 and not trying to get to the other 2 or 3, then that's the problem, right? That's the disservice. The disservice is not getting there. The disservice is not trying to get there. And I tell my teachers that every day.
Do you think it's possible for me not to be very well connected to the students, not even very much like them, to be very honest with you, but still be very good at getting them to understand the basic concepts of reading, writing, math, even though I don't have this other, I don't have a warm and fuzzy disposition at all. I'm not very connected. Can you still be a good teacher if you don't have those things going on?
Yeah, because you may not outwardly have the connection, but there's some outside things that you have to do as a teacher to get kids to learn to read and write, right? So even if you're not warm and fuzzy, if you're going home looking at your curriculum and looking at the lesson plan and making sure that it's engaging and it relates to the students, that's some intentionality, right? So maybe on the outside, you're not warm and fuzzy and your kids don't see it, but they're going to look back and be like, you know what? Miss So-and-so wasn't very warm and fuzzy, but she sure did teach her butt off, right? Yeah. So I'm not saying you got to be warm and fuzzy and jump on tables all the time, but when you put in the effort to make sure your kids are educated, that's enough, right? And your kids, when they get older and understand it, they'll appreciate that. They'll say, you know what? They love me enough to perfect their craft to teach me. And I'm good with that.
Yeah, I think there's some people who see these videos of the teachers with the special handshakes at the outside the door. Or, you know, like I don't know the guy's last name, Ron something or other, who dances.
Ron Clark,
Yeah, Ron Clark. You just said dancing. Like, I get tired just watching his videos just like for 30 seconds. Like, he's jumping on tables. He's doing all these dances and stuff. He's coming down the slide, you know. And I'm like, well, damn, 5 minutes of that would have me tired. I'd be sitting at my desk after that. I don't know what's going on with all that. But I do ask this question because I think that we probably do have a large number of teachers who feel like I can do my craft. I know how to teach. And maybe I'm not as connected as everybody else is to the kids, as the kids have changed over time, but I still can teach. And I think in a lot of cases, they reject this idea that relationships matter more than skill, like skill in teaching.
So, I'll say, this, Chris, in some schools, that teacher wouldn't do well because relationships do matter, right? If you never taught a kid that comes to school not getting loved at home for whatever reason, not because the parents are bad, just because the parents have so many other things going on that they don't necessarily think and to love and hug your child, then you're not going to get nothing from that child if you don't build that relationship. Now, I did come from a home that was loved and my parents look after me, so I didn't need you to hug on me or handshake me up.
As a matter of fact, you probably got weirded out like I did when teachers tried to hug you.
Yeah, right.
I thought that was weird. Yeah.
But I can't say that the student next to me didn't. He or she probably didn't get the love I got at home. So they do need to be handshaked up and hugged up, right? And so if a teacher works in the school where relationships matter and you don't have those relationships, then it's okay to say the school is not for you because your skill won't be enough. But you may work in a school where skill is enough, right? My school, relationships matter. You have to have the skill and the relationship. I'm not going to say they're a 1A or 1B. I'm going to say they're both a 1. You better have both, and you better be able to do both well or work to be able to do both well, or you won't survive.
Yeah, you're making the point that Kiana Warren is making in the comments. She says, I want skill and relationship. If you can't do both, you will not work at my school. These are high standards. Educator Barnes says you have too many teachers making cute lessons and videos for the internet, but can't teach. Don't be fooled. And she puts an exclamation point on that one. So Vashawn Smith said about Ron Clark, don't get me started.
Yeah.
I feel like people are not feeling the virality of these happy teacher things that people do. Let me ask you another question as a person who's an educator and who has seen some things in schools. I had a kindergarten teacher for one of my kids who had come from a charter school to a district school. My kids are in neighborhood schools, like district schools. And she relayed to me, like I asked her about her experience, and she just told me straight up, she's like, I didn't like the way that they teach the kids over there at the charter school that she's talking about. And what she meant was they use direct instruction. And she's like, I don't like to do direct instruction. I don't like to teach that way. The next part really blew me away. She said, I know it's good for those kids who they have and that it works. I personally just don't like to do it. So I wanted to come to a district school where I wouldn't have to do that thing. Looking into it, the research on direct instruction blew me away. I did not know this. There's a local friend here who put me on to the largest study of education ever about what works. And it was on direct instruction. And it had an outsized performance of all the other interventions they were trying. Direct instruction was tops. It's the best thing that has ever been researched in the history of education. What happens if I don't like to teach that way, though? I know it works. Research tells me it's the thing that's good for the kids that I'm trying to serve and whatnot, but I don't like doing it. That's just not what I want to do.
At all? So you can't not do it at all, right? I'm proud of the group that says it shouldn't be the only thing that you do, right? So I'm not saying you should only direct instruct, but again, folks that are teachers or been in schools enough, you're a teacher or principal or someone who understands how schooling works, whether that's a parent who's involved, there is some power in the teacher being able to teach and deliver instruction to a child, right? Because you're in school for a reason, because you do have to be, someone has to teach you directly, right? I do have to learn something before I can go off and do things on my own. And so if you're against direct instruction, I don't even think you can survive in the best schools, because it will come to a point where the kid does need to be taught from a teacher who has the skill set. But that part about, I know it's good for the students, but I don't want to do it, and that's heavy.
Well, I mean, and to be fair, what she was basically saying was, I actually felt a little bit relieved because she was a younger teacher, a white teacher, who was basically saying, I realize that it actually is good for those kids. And if I'm not with it, I'm not going to stick around. Yeah, I'm not going to stay there and sabotage it. I'm going to just make a different move. Like, I'm going to go somewhere else. I wish everybody who didn't agree with how they are teaching kids that works would self-select out of it, rather than staying for 40 years and making a principal really angry over time. Anyways, I think you froze, David. Look at you, man. You frozen, bruh. You'll come back, I know. Raymond Ankrum, Ray, my colleague from 8 Black Hands, has a quote here, has a comment here. Kids should be doing the heavy lifting in the class. I don't know what that means, Raymond. You should actually put another comment there that helps me understand what it is. Educator Barnes says, I don't like to do direct instruction, goes into the same bucket of trash with teachers who say, I don't look at data. Go on somewhere, she says with an exclamation point. Kimberly Jackson says, when a student knows that their teacher is glad they're in the school day, that means a lot, and they're easier to reach when your student knows that you love them and you're invested. Thanks, Kimberly Jackson. Looks like we have you back, brother. You like froze for a minute and then you went out.
And I went out and it came baback in. Yeah. Right. I don't know if it's the rain in Indianapolis, but I was going to tell you, Chris, I'm going to tell this small personal story. So to your point, when you have teachers that buck against the mission and vision of the school, but they want to stay and they get mad when you push them out, I don't understand that when you bumped against everything that we did. So to your point, for your kindergarten teacher to say, this ain't for me and I'm going to step out, that is the right move. And we do need more educators to have the confidence and the goal to just make that move for themselves and for the sake of children.
Michelle Johnson says, many teachers who don't like direct instruction are also content poor. You have to be content rich to do direct instruction as well. Michelle Johnson, you got to come on my broadcast.
Yes.
You've been dropping too many things. Like as a civilian, like you leave me with the same things to think about. See, I feel like you educators, you black teachers, black principals and whatnot, y'all have a secret meeting where y'all talk about how you're going to say important stuff in a way that makes me want to know more, but know that I don't know, right?
That's just
because many teachers who don't like direct instruction are content poor. You have to be content rich to do direct instruction well. What does that mean? Do you know what that means?
Yeah, exactly. So if I'm an ELA teacher and I don't understand how to annotate a text, which is basically how to mark up a text to get students to understand and pull out important details, right? If I don't understand how to do that, then it's hard to stand in front of students and read this text. And when they ask a question that I might not know how to find it, or I haven't read the text enough where every question my kids ask me about, well, why did the author say this? Or what's the author's meaning of this? If I can't answer this, that's very uncomfortable to sit. And if I'm a principal and I'm sitting looking at a teacher and I listen to their kids questioning and you look dumbfounded, then I'm gonna say, ooh, you don't understand the contents, right? You don't understand the text. And if I can't take a state standard and break it down and say what students need to be able to know and what students should be able to do to fully grasp or master that standard, then I will shy away from direct instruction because now it's gonna put me out there. All the lights on me, right? And so if I can't do that, then I'm gonna just create activities and go to Teachers Pay Teachers and print off these worksheets and have my kids sitting quietly and do that. So when they say, well, look at all these brown children sitting quietly working, right? Well, they ain't learning. They're just working. They're not learning.
David, I'm glad you just said this last part because as a parent of multiples, and I'll just be real with you, my wife does the heavy lifting with my children in terms of the education piece. Even though I live in this and talk in this every single day or whatnot, the reality is I'm a civilian. My wife actually has the heavy load with my kids, but we may not be experts on all this stuff we're talking about right now. But when we see 8 million worksheets come home and our kids are getting like anxiety about the number of them that they have to complete. And it's just make work. When you look at it, you realize it's make work. They're not even thinking anymore. They're just kind of like, I know how to do this already. Why am I doing 80 problems when I already know I've obviously have mastered this on board? We may not be experts, but we know there's something wrong with you and your teaching when that happens. I will say this. All the people in the comments always make this broadcast better. The things that you all say and you put here, I really do read every single comment after the show. I've seen several that have come up about this direct instruction. I would love to have maybe 4 of y'all, and you included, David, to come back and talk about direct instruction. Because as a person who's on the outside looking in, it's super compelling to me that the largest body of educational research actually returned after it compared different teaching styles and methods and programs. It came back with the idea that direct instruction was the clear winner out of in comparison to many others in terms of its effectiveness. So would love to come back and have you back. Hopefully you're willing to come back
Oh yeah, and listen, when you start talking about instruction, I raise up in my seat because now that's why I got into this, right? Like relationships are good. I'm good at those things, but I pride myself on being able to deliver instruction, or in my new role, coaching teachers to deliver effective instruction. So I love those conversations, and I'd be interested to hear people that say they're against it, right? I just want because I don't hear that too often. So I'd be curious to hear like the reasoning why and why they would debunk that you said why direct instruction doesn't work. Right, I just be curious, and maybe maybe we get some folks from I sing Ron Clark's school and I followed it. They don't do much direct instruction, so I'd be curious to hear from those educators why they take the path that they take, in educating. It may work for them.
So if you are in the feed right now, if you are watching this and you are one of the people commenting, and you're an educator who has an opinion about this or some background and some thinking around it, please hit me up. My email address is Christopher@activist.com. Christopher@activist.com. Hit me up because I want to do a show on direct instruction. And like David just said, y'all do really sit up when it becomes about instruction. We can talk about politics and parents and programs and all that other stuff. But when it comes about the brass tacks, the help that I think we need, David, to be very honest with you, from people like you and the others that I'm asking to jump in here and help me if you want to talk about this, educators, as you're watching this, the help that we need is the bridge between what y'all know and do and the bridge between us that feel like civilians. Because if we're going to activate around things, then it'd be good for us to be informed. Like we can show up to board meetings, but it would be good for us to show up and say, I know y'all don't know how to teach reading as a district, rather than just saying, why we have lights on our football field or whatnot. Like no one ever sits down with us and says, like, if you want kids to learn, you should be focusing on some of these other things here and push the district, push the superintendents, push the districts, and actually push the teachers to get real on some of this research. So anyways, I appreciate you. I do want to tell this one last story, man, because you've heard me tell this story a million times. I'm a lover of history. So anybody watching or listening to this, I always like, as I'm looking into preparing for a show with someone, I look at where they're from. And David and I have had this conversation a million times about Indianapolis. Indianapolis has a school that is still there, but has been there for a long time, called Crispus Attucks. And I can't ever get enough of talking about Crispus Attucks. If you have not heard the story of Crispus Attucks in Indianapolis, you should look up that school's history and just read the story. There's a whole documentary on it. And it's important because there was a time in Indianapolis where the White Citizens Council, or the version of the White Citizens Council in Indianapolis, was pulling black kids out. They were fighting to have the black kids pulled out of all the schools. And they were going to build them one school. And they were going to pull them out of all these other schools and put them in one school. And they did it. And that school was first called Thomas Jefferson. And black folks were like, number one, first of all, you're not going to pull us out of these schools and segregate us. And number two, even if you are going to pull us out and segregate us, you're not putting us in a school called Thomas Jefferson, right? Not so the only thing that they gave on, when I say the White Citizens Council folks gave on, which is basically, just so people who don't know this, Indianapolis was Indiana as a state was a hotbed for Klan activity. Oh yeah, it was very much a Klan state. So in Indianapolis, they didn't necessarily always have hoods, but they had organizations the same. Anyways, they won on pulling the kids out and segregating them into this one school. They gave on the name. So the name is Crispus Attucks. That school, when they put them in, all the black kids in that school, the teachers ended up being black PhDs. They ended up being black people who could not get they could not get jobs at the university level. So they were actually school teachers, like district school teachers. And because all of their teachers were PhDs and better trained than the white teachers, the kids in that school ended up outperforming the entire state. The segregated black school, started by racists, ended up being, they were actually, if people like follow basketball history, like that school produced the first state championship black basketball team.
Oscar Robertson. NBA Hall of Fame.
If you're older and you're watching this show, it also produced like jazz artists like Wes Montgomery. It produced Congress people. It produced politicians, leaders or whatnot. Came out of this school that was poor, black, segregated, created to be segregated by racists. And what it proved was, if you have really good teachers and you create a culture in a school, doesn't matter how segregated or poor or traumatized by racism you are, if you have those things going on, God has a way of like defeating the devil.
Absolutely.
Right. And in this case, God was like, okay, yeah, you go ahead. You put them all together like that.
Got something for you.
Got something for you. Outperform the state. Anyways, I know you get tired of me telling that story, David, but I love it.
Well, here's the thing, Chris, and Kiana said it too. You cry every time you watch it. If you're a Black educator and if you're a Black educator in Indianapolis and you haven't watched it, you need to watch it, because it is a motivation, because it's saying, look what Black people did when they tried to shut us out. They created their own, right? And we built a school absent of the racism, in the middle of the racism, and we made sure that Black kids can flourish. And every now and then I watch it or pieces of it or read about it just to remind myself the why. So I love the story, and you're right. Everybody should read and listen to the story, because it's a beautiful story, and it's one of the best educational stories about our state, because otherwise all you do know is the Klan, right? So please keep telling the Crispus Attucks story so people know Indiana by that story and not the others.
I'm telling you, folks don't know how deep the Klan was there for real.
It was heavy.
I will say this. This is how I tie things together. The reason I actually learned about Crispus Attucks is because here in Minnesota, we have a school called Higher Ground Academy. The person who started Higher Ground Academy, his name is Bill Wilson. The school was specifically started to educate Black children in a city and a state that does a very poor job, a rich, progressive, college-educated city and state that does a very poor job with Black kids. And he has been outperforming the school district for years, like going back to the 90s. When that school first started, the majority of the teachers in that school were PhD level. They were PhDs. So he actually pulled together a team. Bill Wilson, who started that school, who passed away just I think this year or late last year, Bill Wilson was from Indianapolis. He actually grew up in the segregation of Indianapolis. He knew what it was. And the funny thing was, he started the school here in Minnesota on the same basis that Crispus Attucks was started on. He has succeeded. The school has been doing well for years. It's a charter school. Thank you very much. But the people who were anti-charter used to come for him saying, you're running a segregated school. They were talking to an old Black man who lived a life, who would tell them, I'm an old Black man who grew up in Indianapolis during segregation, and I'm looking at 26-year-old and 30-year-old white people who are telling me that I'm a segregationist. I don't have time for this nonsense. Right? Not at all.
No, absolutely not.
Don't put up with it. Well, brother, thank you for coming in. Tell people, while we have been talking, your Twitter feed has been going, your Twitter handle has been going across the bottom. So if folks want to find David, they can find him at Mr. McGuire _teach, at Mr. McGuire _teach on Twitter. You also run a podcast. Tell people about your podcast and how they can find you.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's the Recess Podcast, real education conversations explaining students in school. I think that there was a untapped market in Indianapolis where we weren't having these conversations like you're having. And so as I listen to other conversations that, you hosted and other podcasts about cities, we didn't have one in Indianapolis for, Black educators to come on. And so we, every week on Tuesdays at 7:30, live streaming on Facebook or my Twitter page. My Facebook is David McGuire. We just have these real conversations. And next week, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard, I'll be on talking about dispelling the myths of Teach for America. And so I expect folks to really enjoy that one. But we just have these real conversations, Chris, just talking about education, mainly in Indianapolis right now, right? Telling our story from Black educators. So if I catch us on Anchor, you can follow my Twitter page. You can see the link. You can go to Citizen Ed and you can see the Recess Podcast, the links for other episodes. But yeah, next week, 7:30, Dispelling the Myths to Teach for America. So it should be a good show.
So David was just mentioning you can find his podcast, our podcast, and others that are coming up at citizen.education. Just type that in, www.citizen.education. Full words, all full words, and y'all know how to spell.
Yes, you do.
Don't be sending me some emails later on telling me or showing me that y'all didn't really get the spelling thing right. But you can find David, you can find others, and look forward to more content, new things that are coming up. I love everybody who watches and makes this show richer every day. Thank you for contributing your comments and your thoughts. Please hit me up at Christopher@activist.com if you think you have show ideas, if you want to come on, if you think you have something to share. I'm looking for this daily enriched conversation with y'all every day. So I appreciate you, David. I appreciate everybody watching.
Hey, Chris, I appreciate, I'm going to say this. I appreciate you. I appreciate the platform that you have allowed that Shantae and Andrew and I had in Indianapolis. I don't think people know that, you helped us build this platform. And so we appreciate you, and I appreciate you for not only this conversation, man, but just the guidance on doing this work. So you need to make sure that you know that you're appreciated from us.
I love that. I appreciate that from you. And I have felt that from you and from others. I always want to come back to, I have so much invested in y'all as being the real essential workers. If I care about change and I care about changing the game for our kids, you all, with all the fancy book learning that y'all have, y'all are my biggest investment as a person who doesn't have what you have. I don't have the insight, the education that you have, but every time I talk to you, I feel a little bit smarter, I know something. And the three of you together is a powerhouse. You, Shantae, and Andrew in Indianapolis or whatnot. Man, the next generation is bad. When it comes to this education stuff. The
realist, I told you that the realist generation, the realist education movement, we're gonna coin it, and you're gonna see it in the next blog or something. You're gonna see it a lot. So
all right. Well, folks, if you want to be in touch, find David. Find Shantae Barnes, who's also in this feed, and I'm going to have her back again, and Andrew Pillow in Indianapolis. Please go see. I put the link in the feed here. Go see the documentary on Crispus Attucks School. It's at PBS. So thank you all. Have a great day.
Take care, everybody.